Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up in the next few minutes. Outrageous and obscene, Shell has prompted anger after the oil and gas giant announced its highest annual profits in the company's 115-year history. Taking to the streets, protests continue in South Africa against the country's ongoing power crisis. And a new study suggests long-term exposure to air pollution could cause depression and anxiety. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and investigate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. So let's start with Shell. The energy company has reported record annual profits, the highest in its 115-year history. Now, the numbers, well, they're eye-watering. £32 billion, doubling from last year and smashing the previous record in 2008. Now, environmentalists and politicians, well, they've condemned the earnings, with some saying the company was profiteering from climate destruction and immense human suffering. Well, Sky's business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Nawan joins us now. Gurpreet, good to see you. So just talk us through the reaction to these profits today.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of outrage, as you can imagine, particularly because this comes at a time when households are really struggling with their energy bills. Shell, as you just mentioned, recorded record profits of £32.2 billion last year. That's more than double the previous year, and it's not alone. Many in its sector are also enjoying stellar profits because of the war in Ukraine and what it's done to wholesale energy prices. Now, this has heaped pressure on the government in the UK to increase levels of taxation on companies like Shell. The government has already introduced a windfall tax, a tax that it introduced last year, but Shell isn't paying much towards that when you compare it to the kind of profits it's making. The company said that it paid $100 million, or it's paying $100 million in tax for 2022, a figure that it expects to rise to $500 million the following year. Now, if it strikes you as a tiny fraction of the kind of profits it's making, that's because the taxes only apply to the profits it makes in the UK. The problem is the Shell doesn't make much money in the UK. It doesn't tell us how much money it makes here, but said that revenues from the North Sea make up less than 5% of its global revenues. Now, that hasn't stopped critics and opposition MPs from calling these findings obscene. Labour came out today and said that the company was reaping the benefits of war, but it hasn't actually outlined how it expects to extract more money from Shell.
OK, Gurpreet, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that story. OK, let's head to South Africa now, where hundreds of people have taken to the streets in Johannesburg to protest the country's growing energy crisis, known locally as load shedding. Widespread blackouts are carried out multiple times a day to avoid the total collapse of the energy grid. Well, the South African government is considering to declare a national state of disaster as record power cuts cripple the economy. Our Africa correspondent Yusuf El-Gabir has the latest now from Johannesburg.
We're at a protest in front of the headquarters of the country's sole power supplier, Eskom, where they're delivering their demands for an end to the country's ongoing electricity crisis. They're calling for more consistent electricity supply and more affordable electricity supply. Now, Eskom manages a network of South Africa's coal-fired power plants. Aside from being major emitters, these power plants are very old and very regularly break down, leading to gaps in the supply for a country with a growing electricity demand. Now, in theory, South Africa has everything it needs to move to renewable energy. It has a plan conceptually to transition away from coal into renewable energy sources. It's got the ideal climate for solar power, but an $8.5 billion fund raised by the US and other Western nations was left mostly unspent. It's a country that has relied on coal since it was industrialized. It's an industry that provides a lot of jobs, but the hope is, as the pressure mounts on the state to fix this crisis, there will be more incentive to move to renewable energy.
Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other climate news for you now. And is there a link between long-term air pollution and mental health? Well, a new study suggests there could be, and even at low-level exposure. Now, the study says people living in areas with higher pollution were more likely to suffer depression and anxiety, even when air quality was within official limits. Now, researchers want stricter air pollution regulation. Now, another interesting study, this time showing how microplastics used in food packaging and paint have been found in human veins. Now, the research suggests that microplastics can pass through blood vessels to human tissue, but scientists said it's not clear just yet what the implications are for human health. Next, Costa Rica has withdrawn on a United Nations-backed climate agreement despite being named after one of the country's regions. Escazú Agreement was signed in 2018 and strengthened the country's protection of the environment. But President Rodrigo Chavez has opposed the bill since coming into office in May last year, arguing Costa Rica has sufficient regulations on environmental matters. The treaty has now been rejected. And a new study shows Scotland's historic Caledonian pine woods are in danger of disappearing for good and is calling for urgent action to save Scotland's national tree. The research found the spread of non-native trees and grazing by deer has been threatening the wood's survival, which is home to a range of wildlife, including red squirrels and birds. It said rising temperatures due to climate change is also a threat to the tree's future. And before we go, we want your climate questions. Anything that's ever mystified you about the environment or whatever you want to get to the bottom of, scan the QR code right now on your screen and send us your questions, which will be answered in the Climate Show with Tom Heap. And you'll also be able to watch Tom's show on Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 here on Sky News. And if you scan this QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to this week's edition of ClimateCast. You can listen and subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts from. Well, thanks for watching. That's all from us today. Join us again on the Daily Climate Show tomorrow at 3:30. Bye for now.